Hello friend, welcome back. In our previous video, I have already discussed about that form validation, right? So in this video, I want to discuss about how can add your all that model data into the form. So in Django, they have some of the building functionality. So with this functionality, you can actually create some of the form without creating any HTML form. Okay, how much easily you can create this, I will show you. So right now, that is our application into the application, and that is our forms, right? So before I have already discussed about that validation. So right now we don't need this. I just simply remove everything from here. So I have already created some of the model class. So if you go to that our fast application into the model, and into the model here you can see I defined some of the class as a musician. So into this musician I have defined some of the field as a first name, the last name, and the instrument, right? So here right now I want to create some of the form with this all that field. So here there are the three fields, so automatically it should be created some of the form with this all that field. So how can do that work? In this video I want to show you that things with a live example. For doing this, first of all we have to add our this model. Okay, that means here we have to add these models. So we have to add it in our form area. That means in our form here, first of all here we have to add it. So I just simply define. So you can actually add this with two different way. First of all, you can add it as a form and then your fast app. That means our fast application name, right? Into the fast application, they have also one of the models. So I just simply define our these models, and then you can actually import. Then you can import your album, our models, all that names. So here I have defined two of these, one of the album, another is a musician, right? So that is actually our two class. So you have to define two of this on here as a album. Okay, album, and also if you want to add another one as a musician, so I just simply define two of these. So that is actually one of the process. Rather than if you want to directly get all that model, then you can also define that another way. You can do that things with the form, and into the form that is our fast app. Okay, right, fast app application name, and into this application you can import directly. So I just simply directly import our models. So here I directly added our building Django function as a models. So you can add both of these. So right now I'm actually want to use this one. Okay, so right now I just simply remove it from here. Perfect. And now we have to create one of the class, right? So right now we don't need this. I just simply remove it. So now I want to create one of the class as a musician form. Okay, I just name it as a musician form, and in particular that position we have to iterate with our forms, right? So that is actually forms, and into this form I want to access another one of the class as a model form class. So I just simply define as a model, and then form on the class. Okay, so this class will be inherited with our this form. So that means here with these forms I want to access another model as a, that is our model forms. So into this class I want to create another class. So for the reasons here, if you want to create another class inside the one class, then you have to define that as a class meta. So I just simply define as a class and the meta. Okay, so if you want to define some of the class inside the class, then you have to defining it as a class meta. So here I just simply define that class meta, and in particular that position we have to define our all that models. Right now I want to working with our this model all that field, right? So this field I want to define as a one of the form. So for the reasons here I want to define one of the model. I take one of the variable as a model, and then with our these models, that means here I have already import our models. So with these models, I want to access our class name as a musician, right? That means the musician table. So here I just simply define our musician table, and into the musician table which data you want to take. Into the musician table I want to take actually all that field data, right? There is a first name, last name, and the instrument. So here I want to take all that field data. So if you want to get all that field, then here you have to define as a fields. Okay, you have to define as a fields, and into the fields I want to define all. So here double underline, and then all, and then double underline. Okay friend, so with this you can actually get all that your form data from your musician table. that means from our musician class. Okay, into this musician class I have defined some of the field, so it's automatically will be get all that our field, and I just take the things with this model. Perfect. So here I take all that our field, and that is actually our class as our musician class, right? So now I want to actually view it. So if you want to view it, we have to work in our view, that means in our application, and that is our view. So previously I have working in particular that position, so right now we don't need this. I just simply remove everything. From here I want to start it again. Like first of all, that is our new form. So here I want to create one of the object. I want to create one of the object with this form, and that is our class. So here I define one of the class name as a musician form. So I just simply define that our object. Okay, so with this form, first of all I just define one of the object, and after that I want to define one of the conditions. So I define as if condition. If our request, first of all I want to check it should be as a post method or not, because of all I want to actually save all the data. Like if you go to our site, I have already created one of the form and load it in our home, and here you can see I have already defining it, right? So this form actually comes from our database area. So if you go to our backend, into this backend, so that is our, here I display our musician. So now if you go to that musician, into the musician, right now they have the two data. If you want to add new musician, like here I just name it as a test, and last name as a last test, and then in instrument I just simply define as a INS test. So for education purpose I want to insert some of the data. Click as a save. Now you can see our data is added successfully. So now there is another one, and also if you now refresh it, now you can see it's now perfectly added on here. So I have already defined this part, right? So here I have already defined this part, and also I display it in particular that area with our view. So here you can see I have already discussed about that things with you, right? So now I want to insert this same data. First of all, here I want to define another form for this one. So from to this form area, I want to insert our first name, that means the musician first name, last name, and the instrument. So for the reasons here I define all that our form data. So here into this model, there is our three data, that the musician class, they have the three data, so that means the three field data. So into the three field data I have defined that things in our form area with the field all, right? So now we have to define out this form. For the reasons here I want to define that if condition, and if I first of all I want to check it this is actually the post method or not. So for the reasons what exactly we did, I have already discussed about that things with you. We have to define that things with our method as a post or not, right? So I just simply define as a request, and then method. Okay, request method equal post. So I just simply define as a post or not, and then I want to define our new form, that means in particular that position. Before I have already take it, so now we have to take our all the data. So here our all the data I have to load it. So for the reasons in our with this new form area I want to load it. So the form, okay, with these forms I want to define our this musician form data. That means here I have already created one of the object, and in particular that area I want to define our request. That means our this requested all that post method, that means the post data. So I just simply define as a post. Okay friend, so I hope you can well understand about it. And after that I want to also define, like first of all I want to load all that our field will be loaded, and then it should be insert this data. Okay, this should be insert this data specific our this model area, that means in our musician model. So for doing this I want to define another condition. So here also make that sure you added the column. Okay, so that is actually the column, that the request. Perfect. And after that I want to actually check it. For checking this you have to define as a if condition. I want to define another if condition, and then with our this new form, into this new form I define as is valid, id underscore valid. So I want to check it's valid or not. So if it is valid, then I want to commit this data. So I just simply define in our new form area I want to save it. I want to save this data, so I just simply define as a commit. Okay, with this commit it actually save your all the data, so I just simply define as a true. And also when our this form, that means here when our this form will be commit with our all the data, then where exactly it should be redirected. Also you can define that things on here. I want to redirect it in our index method. Okay, that means in our index function. So into the index function I have already loaded our this page. That means I want to load our all the page in our form URL. That means here I want to load it all that our model data, and then when it should be submitted, then it after that submitted I want to redirect it to our this index page. So for the index I have already created one of the function as index function, right? So now I want to actually pass it on here. So after that I just simply define as a return and return our index. It should be pass our index function area. So into this index function they have also the request. So I just simply define this request. Okay friend, I hope now it should be very much clear to you what exactly the things I did on particular that area. And also for access our form, that means our form URL. So they have our form URL. So for access this form URL, I want to do in our index here, I want to add another button. So if you want to add this button, that is in our index page. That means in our template, into the template, our fast application index, into the index here, you can see that is actually our text. So that is actually the text. So after this text, that means after this text I want to add one of the button. So right now I want to define one of the link. I just simply define one of the ahref link. Okay, so I just simply define ahref, and with the ahref I want to define one of the link will be as a add form. Okay, I just simply define as add form, and here we have to define our URL. So I have already created this URL. So if you go to our fast application, that is our URL, and here you can see I have already created this form, right? So now I just simply copy it. So in our index here I just simply paste it. That is our form. So into this form area also, if you submitted it, you have to redirect it to another page. So for the reasons here we have to define as a semicolon first. So I have already discussed about that things with you, and also I checked it because without this it should be added another slash form after this form, right? So that is the things now I am actually using. So previously I have already discussed about that things with you, why you should use that semicolon before that form. Okay, so I just simply added the form. So now if you click as a save all, and now if you refresh it, now you can see now it's added another link as a add form. Okay, so better after this I want to define another bracket. I just simply define another bracket, and here I define as an add new. Okay, add new, then it should be better. So I just simply defining it, and now we have to load our form. So here I have defined our URL will be form. That means in our fast tab, and that is our form. So into the form position here I define one of the field, right? So here I define field as a field, and also there is our token. So in particular this area I want to work. So right now we don't need this. Okay, we don't need this. I just simply now remove it from here, because in particular that area I have defined that as a test form as our paragraph. So I have already discussed about that things with you, and then also they have some of the headline one. So now we have to take all that our headline one data and the text form data from our model, and we have to visible it in our view page. So now go to our view, in particular that area we have to work. So here we have to defining it. So here we have to define as a we have to pass all that our data to with this diction, right? So for the reasons here I take as a diction. Into the diction I just simply define our two things. Here I want to define all the things with our text form, right? So with this text form I want to define data, and also there is ID as a heading ID. So I just simply define as a text form. Sorry, here we have to define with the single quote. So into the single quote we have to define our text form, and then I want to define our all the data that is in our new form data. I want to load it. So here I just simply define our post that data, and also after that I want to define some of the ID. That means here I want to display some of the data. So in particular that position that is our heading ID, that ID name as a heading one. So I just simply copy it, and now here I just simply defining it. So for the heading ID I want to define some of the text, whatever the text you want. So right now I want to define as a add new musician. Okay, so this type of one of the text it should be display. Perfect. So there is our diction. So there is our diction and there is our return. So here I load our text form, our new form data, that post, and then heading I have passed, and I take the things with this diction, and in our reader, that means in our reader request, in our fast tab form HTML, I have passed that things with this context. That means that is actually diction. Perfect. So friend, that's all you have to do. Now let's check this out. It's working or not. I just click as a save all. Now open it. Yeah, everything is perfectly working. They have no error. Now I just refresh it. Okay, I just refresh it. Now click as a add new. Yes, now you can see friend, now I think it should be very much clear to you. So I explain it how that actually work. So right now here I define our text form. So into this text form I define that on here, right? I just simply define as a text form will be as paragraph. For the reasons here you can see it's now showing as a serial by. And here they have the three forms. So this three form data actually comes from our which table? It comes from our forms, our musician, right? Into the musician form. So into the musician form, if you go our forms area, into this forms area, I define our musician form, our model inherited with our forms. There is another class as a model class, and into this model class I define our models, our musician models. So if you go to our models area, into this models here you can see they have the musician class, and in here there is a first name, the last name, and the instrument. And also here I define as a model one of the type. So with this model I define the type will be as a character field type, and the character field type, right? So now you can see that actually the three field automatically now it's visible on here. So for this form I didn't write any code, right? So perfectly now you can see it's now perfectly display our three of this model field. So that is our three of this model field is now visible, right? And also in our view, into the view I have defined on the headline one, and here I define as a add new musician. So in our form HTML I have defined that as a heading one. So that is actually the ID. So with this ID I actually visible some of the text. So now let's check this out. Here I also define some of the condition, like here first of all it should be checked as a post method or not. So after when it should be checked, then I define as a validation here is valid. So when it should be valid, then it should be save this data, it should be commit this data as a true. That means it should be save all the data in appropriate in our model area. Okay, and into this model I have already load our page. So after that it should be redirected to our return index function. That means in our index function page it should be redirected, right? So now let's check this out. I want to define as a last name I define as a BB, and then CC. Okay, I just simply define as a first name, last name, and the instrument. Click as a submit. Yes, now you can see friend, after successfully added that form, it's now redirected to which page? It's now redirected to our index page. And into this index page here you can see it's now showing as a first name, the last name, and the instrument. So here I have defining it. So there is a return index our this request, that means in our index, that is our index function. So into the index function it should be redirected. So now you can see it's now successfully redirected on here, right? I hope you can well understand about it. So if you want to add new one as a first name I define as a Udemy one, and then Udemy for education purpose I'm using it. Okay, Udemy 2. Now click as a submit. Yeah, now you can see it's now perfectly showing as a Udemy 1, and Udemy 2. And here actually friend is showing actually getting all the things or order by our first name. So that is the things I have already defining it on here in our index request. That means in our index function here I have defined that part. Like here you can see from the musician there is our objects will be as a order by with our first name. So for the reasons actually it's now showing all the data with our first name. So now it's perfectly visible. So how much easily you can add create some of the form with your model form, I think it's very much clear to you. So that is actually the main procedure you have to follow. I think you understand it very clearly. In our next video I want to start a new session. It's about the template filters and inheritance. So how can working with the filters, how can working with the inheritance. In our next video I will show you that things with a live example. So thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.